Hi, it's Jason from Fraser Valley Rose Farm, and today's topic is how to fertilize your plants grown from cuttings. And all of these have been grown from cuttings. Over 5,000 roses and perennials I did this year, and all of them had to transition from this stage here to this stage here. Now, quite obviously, this doesn't take the same amount of nutrients as this. So let's talk about how to successfully fertilize your cuttings through all stages. Whether you're propagating annuals, perennials, roses, or other shrubs, the kind of propagation I'm really talking about here is stem propagation in a potting mix. Now, I should say right up front that this potting mix is not a real soil. This is relatively inert or empty compared to your soil. It really has a lot of this perlite in there. Those are the white bits you see there. And it's built to hold lots of moisture and lots of air, but not offer lots of nutrients to this cutting because this cutting has no roots. And that's probably the most obvious thing to say, but it's the thing I want you to keep in mind for the first stages of your cuttings is this does not have the ability to take up nutrients. So the soil is just there to hold it upright, provide the right conditions, the right pH, and let it root. Now, a good question that's going to come up is, can't I just put a fertilizer solution, a liquid feed, into water and spray it into the leaves, thus foliar feeding the cutting? And the fact is that that's not very effective. What they've found with foliar feeding is it's pretty good at getting some of the minor nutrients, things like zinc, into the tissues of the plants, but it's not very good for putting the major nutrients that your plants need back into this cutting. So it's not a good strategy. It's uneven between the nutrients. So let's face it, this cutting is kind of on its own. The state at which you took it, if it was healthy and had lots of energy in it, that's the energy it's going to have to go with for the whole time until it roots. And the same thing with the nutrients that are in the tissues. It doesn't have an external source, which changes the focus of this whole exercise from how do I feed this to how do I get it to root quickly so that I can start feeding it again. And usually the answer to that is with the conditions. So we're talking about temperature, humidity, that inert soil that I showed you there, and having some rooting hormone on the base of the cutting. Let me show you the conditions inside so I can clarify some of those points. All right, well, I've moved my cutting and propagation projects indoors here, as you can see, and that's because of the time of year. This is going into December now, and our average temperatures outdoors are far too low for successful propagation. So in controlling that temperature, humidity, the rooting medium, and the rooting hormone, that's what I'm focusing on here so I can get quick rooting and get through that awkward stage where my cuttings are running out of nutrients. So temperature, I have it at 21 degrees Celsius. That's about 70 degrees Fahrenheit inside this room. You can go a little bit higher, and if you can offer that as bottom heat that comes up from the bottom, below the tray, below the table, that's even better, faster rooting in that case. Humidity, I do them under domes or timed mist. Inside here it's domes, and that keeps the humidity up in that 80% range, somewhere around that. Look for, you don't have to have a humidistat in there, just look for the condensation on the inside of the dome or the milk jug or whatever you're using to keep humidity around that cutting. So that brings us on to the third thing here, which is the rooting hormone. And rooting hormone is not absolutely necessary. If you've got good conditions, your cuttings may root anyway, but this may speed it along, keeps the results consistent. And as I say, it's a race between your cutting running out of nutrients, running out of moisture even, and running out of energy before it roots. So this can help keep it in the race. Getting a little peek at the conditions I was talking about, you can see there's a layer of condensation on the inside of this dome here. So I'm going to pull this off because these are newly stuck cuttings from just the last couple of weeks, and give you a look at what's going on inside. And one of the first things you may notice is how they've lost a lot of their leaves since the time of cutting. And this has again happened in the last 2 to 3 weeks where they went in here, and that's kind of a natural reaction. It's not necessarily what you want, but it's something you can expect, is that foliage will drop from cuttings due to stress. If it can maintain them, and some varieties maintain them way better than others, that's a good thing. But let's have a look and see if we have any signs of early rooting. And I'm just gonna tease some of these up here, and it doesn't have a lot of pullback on this cutting here, but I do see, and maybe I'll give you a close-up of this here, that there is good callousing across the bottom and a little bit of roots here. So it's not all the way there yet, but that's very, very promising. So what I will do sometimes on this, and I don't think the whole tray is ready for it yet, but as it starts to root, instead of having this nested all the way to the bottom, what I'll do is I'll leave a little gap underneath there. So the condition inside will go from like an 80 to 90% humidity. It may drop to more in the range of 60 or 70 because there's more of a gap in here. There's holes for vent on the top too there. So it's just a fine balance. Whatever dome you're using, fine tune it so you start to transition it off of that humidity as they begin to root. Moving along to cuttings that begin to root, let's have a look at this tray here because this is the one that's not rooted yet. But this one here, you can see some of them held on to their leaves all the way through the process. And then some of them have actually rooted and they're starting to send their new shoots. And as I pull on this, I can feel that they are actually starting to firmly root down into those cells. I've had this one uncovered for a while. See a couple of spots here where plants didn't make it and I pulled them out just because I didn't want the deads in with the living ones. And so have I begun to feed? The answer to that is yes. But keeping in mind that those young roots, like the ones I showed you in that close-up, are very delicate. So I'm feeding these at about half strength and I'm doing it with liquid feed. The reason I'm using liquid feed opposed to a granular or an organic fertilizer is that it reaches those roots very, very quickly. It's easy to get the dosage right and you can dose it down to half strength to begin just to get them acclimated. Now that we're on to half-strength fertilizer, it'd be fair of you to ask, what's the formulation of that fertilizer in NPK and other nutrients? And I'm going to say it's very similar to what you give to adult roses, a balanced nutrition, higher N and higher K, that's what your roses go through the most of, a lower phosphorus value, some magnesium, some calcium, some iron, and micronutrients. So if you get the whole package in one fertilizer, that's great. There's lots of fertilizers that do that. I do have to address at this point the myth that giving a higher amount of phosphorus will boost the roots of your plants. You'll see root boosters out on the market saying that high phosphorus boosts the roots of your plants, and it's not true. Phosphorus is needed in a lower amount. If it's missing entirely, of course there is problems with rooting, but usually if you have, say, 3 nitrogen, you'd want 1 phosphorus, something in that range there. So a 3-1-3 or a 2-1-2 or anything similar to those ratios is probably the right amount. Now when it comes to that phosphorus, it is one of these myths that hangs around for a long time, and the analogy I would use is that just like the human body, you can have vitamins and nutrients that are essential. If you don't have vitamin C, you'll get scurvy. But if you get way too much vitamin C, your body will just dispose of it. Or worse, in the case of iron in the human body, too little will give you anemia. So of course it's necessary, but if you get it in very, very high amounts, it can be very harmful to your health. So don't overdo it on phosphorus. It happens to be one of those nutrients that hangs around for a long time in the soil and won't benefit your plant above the small amount that it needs. The final question in my mind that I need to answer is, when do you transition to full strength fertilizer? And it's about the time, in my case, when I move from that little plug into a larger pot size like this. At that point, I can go to full strength feed just like my other plants, or I can actually even change from liquid feed into granular or organic or whatever other way I want to feed it, because I no longer need that level of control over the dosage. So you can feed it any way you're feeding your other plants. In fact, all of these roses and perennials that I have on the table here and elsewhere in the greenhouse have been getting full feed for months now, and I'm actually at the stage of reducing it a little bit over the winter just because that's the stage and time of year that justifies it. So the whole journey here now, in recap, start with nothing, no fertilizer in the soil, no fertilizer in the water. It can't absorb it. You have to focus at that point on conditions, temperature, humidity, the soil and the rooting hormone, and count on that to do its job. Once it has fresh roots, you can start with half strength feed, high N, low P, high K, that's what it kind of needs. And once it gets into a larger pot size, you can transition onto a full feeding program. Hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, please drop it into the comments below the video. I'll see what I can do to help.